and welcome to a new live demo. My name is Maria Pais, and I am your host for today. And I'm here with artist Lenard Lai. Hi, Lenard.
Hi, how are you? Hi, everyone. Hi.
So excited. So welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. If you can subscribe to our newsletter, to our YouTube channel, so you can get notified of every new demo, make sure you hit that bell so you get notified. And subscribe to our email newsletter and make sure to whitelist our email so we don't get sent to spam. So yeah, whitelist us if you can. Then grab the link of today's demo, share it with your friends so we can spend a lovely, lovely Friday night or Saturday morning, depending on where in the world you are. And just enjoying a lovely painting. So please at the end, fill in the live demo survey so we can make sure to bring you the best content every single time. And you can let us know if you want to see more artists. So if you have any questions for Lenard today, please write the word question in all caps and then write your question normally. This will just help me browse the chat easily and find the questions among the conversation. I will be grabbing the questions and asking them to Lenard when they are relevant to what he's doing at the moment. If your question is not related to what he's doing at the moment, I will save them for the Q&A portion at the end or ask them when they are relevant. But don't worry, I am seeing your questions. I'm just not asking them if they're not related to what we're doing at the moment. Now, today we have a 1 hour time limit, but I know Lenard is itching to get started. But before we get started, Lenard, can you please show us some of your other paintings? Because we would really like to see all of what you're about.
Okay. Hi guys, my name is Lenard, and I think some of you guys might know me, or probably maybe just give a shout out if you if you follow my Instagram Drawplet MY. Otherwise, I'm a food illustrator based in Malaysia. So it's really early right now. I think some of you, if you're joining in from Malaysia or Singapore, it should be quite early. And thanks for joining. I hope you are awake now. All right, so just for your info, so I'm a food illustrator based in Malaysia, and I paint like mostly food illustration. So these are some of the realistic food art that I do. These stuff here. And basically why I paint food is because for Malaysian, food is like our pride. So I always feel proud to paint delicious food, and it's also something that I like apart from painting. So I believe that most of you can identify here, especially for those of you who are on a diet. You would probably like to paint because then you can enjoy the food while having your diet, you know. So yeah, so these are all the delicious food that I paint. I hope I don't like make you crave for any of this food. And this is one of my all-time favorite. It's like a donut piece.
Super hungry right now.
I know. I haven't had my breakfast, so yeah. All right, so these are all the realistic food illustrations that I usually do. And today we are going to do something that is fairly simpler due to the time constraint. So these are all the things that we'll explore basically, and we will only paint the cherry tart today. But during the mini workshop, we will explore this, which is a blueberry tart. And there's a bit of difference in terms of the tart here. And then during our final workshop, which is a 3-hour workshop, we will focus more on the strawberry because this is slightly more complicated and it will take a bit more time. So today we're just going to paint one, and the mini workshop will have this. And for the main 3-hour workshop, we will focus on the strawberry. So make sure if you're not sure where to find the mini workshop, I think Maria will send a link later, and I will also link it on my Instagram. So if you haven't followed Drawplet MY, that's DRAW, draw, PLET, Drawplet, and MY. Yeah. All right. So basically we'll kind of do something like this at the end of all the 3 sessions of workshop. So do join me and join in if possible. And without further ado, I think we'll start our painting. All right. So just a quick notice. If you guys are not sure, there's actually a sketch sheet, a guide sheet that is found in the description, right, Maria? is in the description, right? So you guys can download this. There's a PDF file, and you can print it out or you can trace it over your screen if you haven't. So if you can quickly print it out, that would be great. But if you can't, it's okay, because I have yet to draw this as well, and we'll draw this together. I will just trace this and I show you guys how that can be done. All right. So this is found in the description. Once again, you can download this and you can print it out on your own time if you haven't done so, or you can print it out right now just before we start. All right. So we're going to start off with a sketch, and let's jump to my artboard here. All right.
Yes, let me highlight your artboard so people can see it big. There we go.
Yeah, all right. So also to highlight, try not to rush this. I know that it's 1 hour is like a bit rush, but try to pace yourself. And the most important thing about painting is to enjoy the process, right? Like enjoy the food, enjoy the process. So make sure that when you paint, try to be as slow as you can. You don't have to follow my speed. You can always watch the replay. And what you should emphasize on is on the question, if you have any during this process, because after this session, probably you wouldn't have a chance to ask me, or you can just ask me in the comments as well. So try your best to follow up, but if you can't keep up, remember to always pace yourself, because that's really important. Oftentimes when we try to rush things, then we would kind of screw things up. So what we want to do is really just to pace ourselves, all right? So we'll start off with the tracing process. I would just highlight a bit about how I usually trace most of my painting. So for those of you who doesn't know, I usually do realistic food art and I trace my art. So why do I trace? Some people say that it's cheating, but I feel that it's just part of the process because I want to focus more on the watercolor. So it helps me to save time. And so there are two ways of tracing. The first method that you want to trace is on your screen. So you can just take your iPad or your laptop or whatever, and you just place it down and basically open the file of your picture, and you can place your art paper on top of it and adjust the brightness to the brightest, and then you off the lights. So that's how I trace it. So treat this as kind of like a light box. The professional, but if you are on a budget, you can always use a phone or an iPad or your laptop to project the image, and you put your art paper on top of it. But today I'm going to use method number 2, which is tracing paper method. So this is like a tracing paper. If you don't have this, you're not sure where to buy or what's the name of this, it's called tracing paper. You can also use baking paper because, you know, it's food, and you can also use baking paper if you are baking or you usually bake at home and you have some of these as well. So it doesn't really matter what the material is as long as you're able to see through. So I'm going to use a tracing paper, and I have actually traced out the outline. So this is one very important note, is that when you want to use a tracing paper, make sure to flip the picture before you print it out. So I give you an example. So this is the proper way to do it. So this is the way before I flip, but this is after flipping. So you can see that the picture is kind of like mirror image. It's flipped this way because when I trace it out, I would usually flip the paper for the graphite to come out. So that's how we use the tracing paper. You print it out on a paper like this, and you use a graphite pencil or whatever pencil. I will use usually HB or 6B, which is going to be a bit darker. Or you can use 2B if you don't have any other pencils. So you just trace it over the flip paper. So this is flip. Just look at the words here. You trace it over, and once you're done, there's graphite on this side of the tracing paper. So then we can trace it out on our art paper the usual way. So this is how our cherry tart will look like. So you just trace it on the paper. And I'm going to trace it now. I've used this tracing paper before, so the outline might not be as obvious, but I just need a very light outline in order for me to have an idea. So while I'm tracing, you guys can, if you don't have a tracing paper or whatnot, you can try to draw it out based on the reference sheet. If you don't have this, remember to download this in the description. And I'm just going to quickly draw out based on my tracing sheet. And once again, I would like to highlight that if you miss out any of this, there would be a replay. So don't worry if you can't keep up. Just try to absorb in as much as you can. So right now I'm tracing, and something to take note while you're tracing is not to trace blindly, but while tracing, try to think of the shape of the item and also try to observe as much as you can where the light source is coming from and where's the shadow and how are you going to paint later. Try to visualize. And when you're painting later, it's going to be much easier that way. So as you are tracing, remember to not trace blindly, but also observe and use this time to just look at what needs to be done. And also remember to always check if your tracing outline is there, because sometimes the graphite isn't as deep. So we want to make sure that the tracing is there. You can do this by just flipping it over while pressing the paper down. So you just cross-check to see if the line is there. All right. So I'm going to continue tracing very quickly. And if you want to challenge by drawing out instead of tracing, feel free to do so as well. The issue with drawing out instead of tracing is that there would be proportional issues sometimes. So the image will be a bit out of proportion, and our brain would usually detect these little discrepancies when we look at painting like this. So that's really important to have the right dimension and proportion. Otherwise, your brain wouldn't make sense of what is on the painting. So it would look kind of fake. And nobody likes fake stuff, right? So we try to do it as accurate as possible in terms of proportion wise. So it will look natural and it will look 3D. All right. So don't worry if you make a mistake or whatnot. This is just an outline. And once we're done with this, we can always do some correction on the actual sketch. So you just have to trace it roughly. You don't have to be too precise on it. But of course, if you can be precise, then try your best to be precise.
That makes sense.
And this is this part. And you can take note that some of the things I would not sketch it out, such as some of the highlights, I don't really draw it out. So these are things that are really important for you to take note. For example, there's a highlight over here that I didn't really draw it out here, but you can do so. It's really up to your preference. And I like to do notes on my sketches just a very light note. So when I'm painting later, I would take note of those. Let me give you an example once I'm finished tracing. All right, so let's just check this. Okay, this is a finished product. So it's really light, but as long as it's good enough for you to see, it's good enough. All right. So as I was saying earlier on, that you can actually take note of highlights here. Maybe you want to just draw a dot here that will be a highlight. So while you're painting later, you will remember to leave out that highlight. So this is really important because in watercolor, it requires a lot of pre-planning as compared to acrylics or oil painting or gouache or some other medium. So some people say that watercolor is one of the hardest medium is because you have to plan things out before you paint. So you can't be as spontaneous as oil or acrylic, for example. That's because once you paint over, you can't really paint white over this part anymore because the white is going to be transparent. So that's the nature of watercolor. For gouache or acrylics, for example, you can paint it on top of the red. You can paint white here, you can paint white there. anywhere you want. But in watercolor, we try to leave it blank because we can't get the white back. So we are going to plan it in advance. And that's really something important to take note of watercolor. So I would always encourage you to start really light, because if you go too dark, it's harder to reverse. So make sure you always start lighter, and then you can slowly build your layer. All right. So here I'm going to give you a really fast tip in order to achieve a really realistic outcome. It's really crucial to have minimum of 3 tones, which is light tone, mid tone, and dark tone. So it's usually one of this that is the culprit. If you realize that your painting looks flat, is either you're missing out on a light tone or a mid tone or maybe a dark tone. So make sure to always get your tones in, the more the merrier. And that's what we're going to do today. And also before we start, just make sure that you get everything in the sketch. So just do a double check really quickly. And that's what I'll usually do. And if there's any lights that you feel will create some confusion while you're painting, try to address them before you paint, because once you paint, you need to act really fast. And so you want to make sure that there's no confusion before you start painting, all right? And also before we start painting, it's really important to take note of the light source. Where's the light coming from? So in this case, I will just sketch it out on this paper here. The light is coming in from probably the front, let's just put it like this, the front left. So it's coming in from the front left, as you can see through the highlights. So there's a few ways to find the light source, is to look at the highlights. If they are in front, it means that the light is coming from the front. If they are behind or you can't really see any reflection, it's probably coming from the back. So the second way to identify a light source is by looking at the shadow. So if you look at the shadow here, the shadow is actually being casted on this side. So the light source is obviously coming from this side. That's how we kind of identify the light source is coming from. So it's very important, because the light source would determine where we lay our colors, be it dark tone or light tone. So make sure to always know where your light source is coming from before painting. So that's really important. I have to emphasize that like 1,000 times. All right. So once we identify our light source, then we can kind of start painting. And you would want to see, like, usually people would ask me, like, where do I start painting? Like, if the painting is really complicated, try to break them down into bite sizes. So for example, I'm going to start by painting cherry by cherry. And I usually use really light color just to go through the entire sketch once. So even if I make a mistake in my first layer, it wouldn't matter as much, because it's going to be very light. And I'm painting on cellulose paper. I'm using Canson Monval. So it's a cellulose paper. For those of you using cotton paper, it will be a bit different. The main difference would be that cellulose paper, the water tends to stay on the paper for a longer period of time. Whereas for cotton paper, if you're using Etcher Perfect Sketchbook, for example, they are using a cotton paper for that. So for cotton paper, they absorb the water much faster. And so there wouldn't be a pool of water on top of the paper, which gives you better control. But it doesn't mean that this is bad, but it's just different way of painting. So let me just show you. Okay, so I'm going to start painting now, and I'm going to start with my color mix here. And you can see that my palette is kind of messy, but it doesn't really matter, because I'm not worried about that. I will just use the spaces that are available. I'm using red right now. This is red. It's a bit like Daniel Smith's Queen Rose. So I'll just put it on the side so you can see what it looks like. So it's kind of pinkish as well. So this is the red that I'll be using for my cherry, and I will mix it with sap green, or any green will do. So if you have any red or any green, you can just mix it to get kind of like a scarlet color, which is a darker version of red, and it's the perfect color for cherry. So this is the darker color that I have. So this is kind of like a scarlet color when I mix red with green. And the thing with this is that if you want it to be darker, you can just add more green. And this is how I would like to mix my colors, to have different spectrum of the colors on different sides. So there's a really light tone here and my dark tones are here. So where they meet, this is kind of like the mid-tone. So when I paint, I kind of have a variety of color to choose from. And that's really important. And we're going to use a lot of wet on wet technique later on. So for wet on wet technique, it's always better to pre-mix your colors. So the water on your paper doesn't dry out while you're coming in with the dark color. So because wet on wet, you need to act really fast. So make sure that you have your colors prepared so there wouldn't be much of a panic later when you are laying down the colors. All right. So let's begin. I would advise that, yeah.
We are 20 minutes in and we have a question in the chat asking what brush size are you using?
This is a silver brush. It's size 6. And I'm painting on, this is an A5 paper. So let me just give you a perspective. This is 8 inch. This is 8 inch by 5 inch. So 8 by 5 inch paper. And yeah, so this is size 6. And it's just important to have a big size and a small size. So that's probably sufficient for today. We just need to have a smaller size brush. This is a size 2 and this is a size 6. This is silver and this is a local brand, Art Pack, that I got from my local store. So we're gonna start painting now, and due to time constraint, I'm gonna go a bit faster, so I hope you don't mind. And we're gonna start from the scarlet color, and we're gonna paint around the highlights. So you notice that I work really wet, and I'm gonna zoom in a little so you can see clearer. I work really wet because that gives me more time to do wet on wet and that it doesn't dry as fast. So for those of you who are new to watercolor, wet on wet is basically a technique in watercolor whereby it's wet brush on wet surface. So this is one of the more popular techniques of watercolor. It's one of the beginner's technique, but it's also really hard to master. So don't worry if it's not looking fine. It takes time to gauge the amount of water to be on your paper and the amount of water that's needed on your brush. So take your time to gauge what's the best amount of water. And right now, it's still wet. If you can see, it's glowing. And this is the best consistency on your paper where it's glowing. While it's glowing, I would just add some really dark, to the point it's almost black color on the sides of the shadow here, and the colors will slowly bleed out. So this is known as wet on wet technique. And why am I laying my darker colors here? Is because light source is coming from the front. So this area is going to be darker. So while waiting for this to dry, I would continue with my berries. So I want to skip the berries that are nearby so that the colors wouldn't bleed. So let me start with this one because it doesn't touch. So I'll just go through really quickly and leave out the highlights. And remember to always start lighter, because when you have any mistakes, it will be easier to correct. So while you're reaching this area of where the root is here, I mean where the stem is, try to leave some highlights along, and we're going to paint inside, and we connect it to the main body here. So this is because light is reflecting, and this part of the cherry protrudes out more. So there's a highlight there. And we'll try to do this as quick as possible. I like to have a clean finish here. So I'm really trying to paint within the lines. And that's something that I'm really particular about, keeping my paintings clean. And different artists have different style, but this is just my personal preference. So don't have to worry too much about that. And remember, while it's wet, I will come in with some darker colors. I'm using a smaller brush. And this is basically red and green. Just on the side. And maybe a bit on the bottom. Just at the edge of the cherry. So
we have a question of if you have any tips if you accidentally paint the highlight.
Yes, there are a few ways to do it. The first way is that you can lift it up. That's a technique in watercolor. It's called lifting technique. You can search that up. Lifting, where you lift the colors using water. So for example, when you dirty the floor, you want to mop it up. So it's kind of like the same theory with that. So for cellulose paper like what I'm using, or if you're using Canson XL, Canson Monval, Strathmore 400 series, those are cellulose paper. And for cellulose paper, it's easier to lift it up. Cellulose also means wood pulp. So if it's wood pulp paper, the colors are easier to lift if you make a mistake. So in other words, it's more forgiving. And if you're using cotton paper, it's slightly harder to lift it up because the paper would absorb the paint much deeper into the grains. So my answer to that is that you can either lift it up or you can use a white gel pen or white gouache or any kind of white paint or white ink to just add on when it's dry. But personally, I wouldn't like that because I would feel that the texture is going to be a bit different if you use a white paint to paint it on top of the cherry instead of leaving it blank. So if you're not too particular on that, then you can actually just add white paint afterwards, like once you're done with the painting. So if you make a mistake, don't be too sad about it. As the great Bob Ross says, there's no such thing as mistakes, but there's happy accidents. So try to think of it as happy accidents instead of mistakes. That would kind of make you happier probably. And that's a motto that I kept and I always kind of want to tell my students. There's no mistakes, only happy accidents, right? So I'm gonna continue painting and let me know if you have more questions. I'll try my best to answer them while I'm painting.
Of course.
And, yeah. And
I
will
also want to remind everyone, sorry, Leonard. I want to remind everyone that if you're enjoying Leonard's way of teaching and how he's so thoroughly explaining his process, then remember to sign up for his mini workshop. It's going to be on June 6th or June 7th, depending on where you are in the world. But I'm going to drop a link on the chat for that. And just a reminder, our website is in Australian dollars. So you might see a little bit of a variety in the prices sometimes, but that is depending on the exchange rate of the day. So that's why you might see a little bit of variety in the prices, but do sign up. We do sell out sometimes with our mini workshops. So I recommend that if you want to attend, just grab a seat while you can.
All right, thanks for the promo. So do remember to join. We'll be painting a blueberry next. Just a quick promo again. So this is what we'll be painting during the mini workshop. And our aim is to really have something like this for you guys. So you have like a set that you can hang it up on your wall or just hang it in your kitchen or whatnot. So remember to sign up in Atch's website. There will be a link provided, I think either on my story or you can just search my name, Drawplet or Lenard, and you can find it. So I'm just gonna come in with more darker tones here. And just another quick tip is that you notice that my highlights here is kind of like a blend instead of like a clean cut. So how we do that is that while it's wet, we can use some clear water to just push back a little bit to give it that smudgy edge. And this is much easier to do it while it's wet, because while it's wet, it's always movable. So that is something to take note of. And that's why we encourage you to work faster. All right. So for the front of the cherry right now, the face of the cherry, which is the one that after you cut into half, we'll add a bit of vermilion, which is kind of like an orange. This is my vermilion. It's kind of like a reddish orange. I'll just add a bit of vermilion to make it brighter. And I'll paint the face of the cherry. So again, I'm going to leave some highlights. Remember to always take note of the highlights. And this area is going to be lighter than the body of the cherry. And one more tip for beginners is that when you're painting surface areas, you can press down the brush, press it down instead of just using the tip. So I realized that a lot of beginners throughout my years of teaching that they like to just use the tip like this to paint, but that would result in a very strokey and patchy artwork. But if you want it to be smooth and seamless, try to also use the belly of the brush and try to be bold. Plenty of times we try to be really careful, and that's why we don't really use the belly of the brush. We are trying to be as meticulous as possible and to have much control as possible. But
we have a question that if you ever wet your paper first?
Yeah. That is a technique called pre-wetting. That's usually used for more loose outcome. And you can do that if you want it to have like a loose edge. Loose edge meaning that the edge can be a bit more washy. I'll give you a little example on the side, just for your question. So this is like an exclusive showcase. So for example, if I pre-wet this area here, while you're pre-wetting, make sure that your water is clean, so there wouldn't be like a line at the side when it's dry. So for example, I'm pre-wetting this area here. You can see that my water is a bit reddish, so there might be a line here later, but I'm just showing you what kind of outcome can you achieve by pre-wetting. So if you pre-wet here, chances are you probably want to achieve a loose edge. So it's not like this, very crisp, but you want it to be looser. So just look at this. The water will spread out, creating like a smudgy effect here. And that's the reason why people like to kind of pre-wet some of the areas to give it that tight and loose edge to showcase the qualities of watercolor. So this is a really nice effect to have. It makes your painting come alive, and it makes it unique in a sense where it's not just like a photograph, but there are also qualities in watercolor that you can see through the painting. So that's mainly the reason for pre-wetting. And there's also another reason to pre-wet your paper is that it will absorb better, especially for cotton paper. So I hope that answers your question. I'm gonna work way faster now. I hope that you can try your best to keep up.
Don't worry about it. You remember, everyone, that you can come back and pause and take a break afterwards, but we want to make sure that we give Lenard enough leeway to finish this because we want to see the result.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to come in with more darker tones. So let's just really fast go through everything once again. And with the second layer. So now that most of it is dried, I want to come in with some black here. So this is black, and just mix it with my dark red. And this is a really dark color here. And now that I have my dark tone ready, I would mix more of my cherry tone, which is here. Make sure not to mix them. So I'll mix it on a separate pool here, mix it with some greens, And you can add some indigo as well, or any kind of dark blue, just to give it some purpley feel. And yes, I'm going to come in with a really light and watery wash because there's already a wash here. So let's just come in really light, another layer. And so we can do our wet on wet again to emphasize the darker tones to give it more contrast. So the more contrast there is, the more 3D your painting is going to be. So make sure to
also remember, if you want an in-depth explanation, a much slower step-by-step, the mini workshop is your friend, so sign up.
Exactly. So sign up for my mini workshop. All right. So just oops. Yeah. So if you did a mistake like me, you can quickly, while it's wet, use a wet napkin to wipe it up.
Magic.
Yeah, magic. So I'm just gonna do a quick one here.
And just to let you know, Lenard, we already have someone that just signed up for your mini workshop.
Aw, thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys signing up. Means a lot. All right, let's proceed with this area here. And to take note of this, behind the cherry, sometimes there are kind of like, it's kind of like reflective because it reflects the table. So sometimes you will notice that there are little white places behind certain objects. That's because it's reflecting the surface. So that's just to explain in theory what's happening when you see things like that. So I would kind of leave, sorry, I would just rub it off here while it's wet. I will leave a little space here. So I'm going to paint around and leaving this first layer here while the rest is in their second layer, just to give it some gloss. And you can slowly realize that our cherry is beginning to take form, and we haven't even started on our tart, but that's fairly quick. So once you're done with the cherry, basically 80% of your job is done. How much time do we have left?
We are near the 40-minute mark.
Oh, okay, we have plenty of time. Right. So just gonna add some shadows here. Remember, shadows is to add contrast. So especially where they meet, use a shadow to separate both cherries instead of using a line. So that would create a natural line here between shadow and light. So it gives you that very natural effect. And we all like natural stuff, right? So yes, just gonna add a bit of dark colors in this area where the stem comes out, and also here. And I'm gonna add some blacks in the holes that we haven't painted. So if your black isn't black enough, just wait for it to dry and come in with another layer. So one more tip for you is that when your painting looks kind of flat or it doesn't look realistic, a lot of times remember the three tones, which is light tone, mid tone, and dark tone. Other than that, it's also very important to make sure that it's vibrant enough. It's usually darker than you think. So if you're a beginner in watercolor, it's usually darker than you think, the painting. So try to make it as vibrant and dark as possible and to be bold. I think bold is the key because lots of times when we do watercolor or whatever art, we try to be really careful, and in the process, we kind of miss out on the good stuff, which is to make mistakes, or I would say make happy accidents. So yeah, so it's kind of like life. You have to take the leap. Yeah. So it's the same with watercolor. Remember to take the leap, and that leap would bring you to a highest place in terms of watercolor and in life, right? So like yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always related, like watercolor, life, or whatever we do. There's always a point of relation, and art is really a form of expressing. So yeah, I would try to add that in most of my workshops. So it's not just all painting, but you're able to relate with life as well.
Yep. See, everyone, you're going to get philosophy as well as painting.
And part of the reason is just to keep you guys entertained, because realistic painting is usually requires lots of patience. So in order to keep my students entertained most of the time, I need to be as entertaining as possible. Right. So okay, so now that I'm done with this and it's really wet here, I'm gonna work on other areas while I'm waiting for this to dry. So the white highlights, another thing to take note, highlights are not necessarily always white. So now that we keep it white, we can paint it over with a light wash of red or pink in that sense. And it gives your highlights more perspective. So it's not just a mere white highlight, which looks kind of fake. And we want it to be as natural as possible. So we just add some colors to the highlights, just some of it, and we'll leave some white. And that will give it some dynamic. So I'm just painting a really light wash of color here. And maybe here as well. And look at that, it just makes the entire thing a tone more natural. So realize that this is not as dark as I want it to be. So I'm just coming in with another layer. Lots of time is just about observing. So I have people asking me, like, how many layers do you need to get like realistic effect? My answer will always be to observe, because we usually use different amount of paint. Everyone uses a different amount of paint. So there's no specific amount of layers that you need, but you just need to observe if it's dark or too light. And that will kind of give you a gauge of whether or not you want to add more layers to it. Right. So now that we are done with this, we'll let it dry for a while before laying down more blacks, and then we'll paint the stem first. So I'm going to mix a bit of green with my red, set green. So right now I'm going to add more green. So it's still the same color. And this is really magical, whereby mixing green with red will give you a dark red, but mixing red with green will give you kind of like a brown greenish color. So you can look at the process of me mixing. Green here. So on one side it's green, on this side it's red, and I slowly get somewhere in the middle, kind of like a brown olive green color. And to go with the stem, try to be really meticulous and to have a bit of a bigger head here. So same goes for the other side. Using a size 2 brush here, so it's really fine. And yes, once we're done with this, the rest of the area is still drying. So we will color in the black areas first. You realize that lots of time I'm kind of alternating between different areas, because this area is where we try to work on other areas first. So that's one way to save time.
Yeah, you're not using a hair dryer. Sometimes
Yeah.
watercolor artists use a lot of hair drying.
Yeah, I don't really like using hair dryers, because it depends as well on what style you're doing. And this is more towards a detailed style. So I don't really use huge washes of color. So I don't really need to dry them as much as some people do, because some of them, like for example, if you're doing a landscape painting, it might be really wet. So you really need to dry that down, even if it's a little. So
True.
because this is kind of like a more detailed and controlled painting, we don't really require that. But if you want, you can always do that on your own as well.
It makes complete sense.
Yep. So I'm going to add some blacks here, even while this is wet, to maybe let it bleed a little inside. No harm. And remember that if it's wet on your paper, it will always dry a tone lighter. So if you want it to be darker, just come in with another layer.
I don't know about our viewers, but I always get frustrated that I lay down a color, it looks gorgeous, and then I look back at my paper and it's not the same.
Yeah, that happens like a lot of times. That's just watercolor. I mean, when you're painting, it looks as if it's really nice because it's wet and the thing is glossy and that it's really vibrant. But when it dries, it usually gets much more dull and not as vibrant. And so it's really important. I think experience will kind of help you to gauge better on how it will look like once it's dried. So if you are experienced enough, you can probably tell that it's going to dry a tone lighter and how light is it going to be. And that will give you a good gauge on whether or not to add additional layers. So it's still that cliche, practice makes perfect. So remember to always practice.
Well, and also what you're saying about being bold and adding darker tones and not being so scared of those darker colors.
Yeah. Just like in life. Right. So it's almost there. Let's move on to our tart.
And just to let you know, we are 45 minutes in.
Perfect. Okay. Let's move on to our tart, and how we're gonna mix those colors is using my favorite color. This is a color that I really recommend that you guys get. Let me see if I can find it here. It's John Brilliant. This is one of my favorite color from Holbein or Holbein, however you pronounce it. John Brilliant, which is kind of like a nude color, like this. And this is one of my favorite color to paint any kind of food. I almost use this for anything, and even for landscape or like blonde hair or, you know, painting the beach. It's a good color to have. So I would highly recommend that. I'll be using that color as well as burnt sienna to get the color of the tart. So let's just lay that in first on my palette. So I'm just gonna wipe this area so I can use. Gonna keep this for my future painting. So don't worry if you have leftover paints, you can use them countless amount of time and they usually wouldn't go bad. So you can always activate them with water. Right, so here's John Brilliant, and I have my burnt sienna here. This is Daniel Smith. And you just mix it like this. So there's two tones here. You try not to mix everything because once you create a mistake, you have to remix it. So I just mix it a little on the side. And to test it out here on my paper, this is a bit too pinkish. So I want to tone it down a little. And how do you do that? By adding a little bit of green. So just on the side, mix it in, and maybe a bit of yellow.
Wait, green? Really?
Yeah. Green is usually the color to make it murky. So if you have a really bright color, you want to mix green to make it a little bit more murky. Wow. So for example, if it looks too orange, then adding some greens would make it a little browner because it's more murky. So it also depends on what color you're talking about. So now that I have a perfect color for my tart, so this is a combination of Jaune Brilliant, burnt sienna, and a bit of yellow and just a touch of green, right? Getting this tart color. And remember, we're going to do a wet on wet. So I'm going to mix my darker shadow color on this side using burnt sienna here, using another brush. So burnt sienna and indigo. Indigo is basically kind of like a dark blue, kind of like dark navy blue. And burnt sienna. So you have a really dark shadowy color here. I'm going to prepare this for later when I'm painting my shadows, so I don't have to mix it later. Okay, so this, place it one side, and right now I'm gonna paint the tart. Okay, so first I would paint the face of the tart, and remember our light source is coming in from the front left. Always take note of the light source. Just going through really wet and quickly. And I try to be precise as possible, so it looks clean and crisp later on. And as we are approaching the back, probably I want to add a bit more, like a darker color. So just gonna come in with a bit of shadow here to join them. So now the colors bleed and it creates a nice gradient. To learn more about gradient, come for my mini workshop as well as my 3 hours workshop. I will teach you more about blending because that's really important for lots of things. And there are a few ways to blend out your color to make it like a smooth blend, like a nice gradient. So I would have more time to talk about that for during the mini workshop as well as the 3-hour workshop. So if you're interested in learning about gradient, how to achieve that smooth gradient, you can sign up for that. And we're moving on to the pie right now. So this is still wet, so I'm just gonna be really careful not to touch that. And maybe just a touch of burnt sienna to give it that vibrance. And trying not to touch this thing because the colors would then bleed, and that's not something that I want. If you're doing this on your own, you can always wait for the top layer to dry, but because we are kind of doing a demo, so I'm just gonna do this real quick. And this area has dried, so I can just touch it, it's fine. And remember to always do it really light so you can correct any mistakes if you happen to have some. So as we're approaching the back, we can add a little more shadow. And the color here seems a bit dull. I'll add some burnt sienna to brighten it up so it looks more striking. Right, so here. And the pie is going to be a bit textured, so I'm going to leave some texture while it's still wet, and even at the bottom. So going to make it a tone darker because everything is kind of light now and there's not much contrast. So I'll just use my darker tones here to just come in a little bit more. Remember, this is where the shadow is, and that's why I'm painting it a bit darker here. And this is still wet. That's the thing why I like to work really wet, is that I can like make sure that the blending is smooth, because when it's wet, it's easier to blend. So I'm going to add some colors here because the light is coming from the front. So there's a bit of shadow on the sides as well.
We have a question here on the chat regarding the Jaune Brilliant, if that is number 1.
Yes, number 1.
Awesome. And then Kimberly wants to know, what watercolor brand do you recommend for beginners who want to learn to start painting in watercolor?
Oh, okay. I would recommend you get Winsor Newton, or if it depends on your budget really. So if you have a nice hubby to buy it for you, then probably you would want something more expensive. But if you're on a tight budget, I would recommend trying either Winsor Newton or personally I'm using, I don't have it here with me.
Leonard,
can
I think are you still there? We lost you for a second. Ooh.
Oops, sorry. Reconnecting.
No problem. We can you flip your phone?
Am I back?
You are back, but your image is flipped the wrong way.
Oh, okay. Just give me a moment. Is it okay now?
Yes, you're back.
Is it? Yeah. All right. That's great. Okay. So back to the question. So for beginners, I would recommend using Shinhan White Knight, or Holbein is a good choice as well. Lots of Korean, Asian brands are fairly affordable. Or if you have a bit more of a budget, you can try out Daniel Smith or Schmink. So it depends on what you paint as well. So I would always recommend that you start out with more affordable range, so you can kind of gauge your which is your favorite brand. Or you can also buy dot cuts from stationery shop. Dot cuts are basically cuts that are for you to test, so you can test out the colors before committing to the entire set. So there are things called dot cut, which is like a dot and card. So dot cards. Can I know how much time do I have left?
3 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay, we're almost done. So I'm going to share a final tip with you guys before we kind of end this with our sprinkle. Okay, we are roughly there. So lights here, shadows both sides, and almost there. We're going to do our shadows now. And this is really nice way to do shadows. Is the pre-wet method that we explored earlier on, is to pre-wet the area below and do our shadow. So this is now wet. I'm not sure if you can see, but I'm just going to tilt it a little so you can see the water.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pre-wet this, and going to come in with some shadows. And remember to always add more, use a darker shadow so there's more contrast. I'm using black. I would usually add a bit of indigo and red to make it a purplish black, but due to time constraint, we'll just paint it like this. So I just want you guys to see this bloom out. So this is the shadow I would usually recommend, like to a wet on wet shadow. So when it dries out, it will look like this. It's going to be really smooth. So that's the advantage of pre-wetting it. I'm just going to slowly go to the front. And as I approach the front, because where the light source is coming from, I would go a bit finer as I reach the front. And maybe a little bit here. And you notice that the water is drying out a bit here. So it's kind of like a clean line here. So I can use my brush, wet brush, to just sweep it in a little to create that similar effect. All right, so it's roughly done. And we have one more step. So I'm just gonna quickly
go for it.
Okay, so this time to use your hairdryer. If you're like me and you don't have enough time, or like someone is bugging you right now to do something, maybe your kid is asking you to do something, then you want to use a hairdryer to blow this before proceeding to our final step, which is, I call this the sprinkle of love. So we're gonna do some sprinkle like this to just give it some watery wet effect. I like to combine a bit of loose and tight to make it, display the quality of watercolors, as I mentioned earlier. So it's going to come in with some red and maybe just a bit of green, whatever colors that you have here. Just make sure that it's wet and moist. So your brush is wet and moist. And you just grab onto another brush and you just hit it like this. So I'm going to try it here and look at that. Hit it here. And I'm going to hit it the other side. And add some strokes here. Just to give it a nicer touch. Right, so this is our quick 1 hour version of a cherry tart.
So pretty.
Yeah, I'll just add in a bit of colors here.
Well, thank you so much, Lenard. This was really so instructive. I think I speak for the entire audience when I say that we learned a ton from this 1 hour live demo, and I can't wait to see what you'll share in the 1 hour and 30 mini workshop. So people, please remember to sign up for Lenard's mini workshop. Share it with your friends. Join us. It's going to be a blast. Imagine all the things you will be able to learn with them. Also, please remember to fill out our live demo survey so we can know how we are doing, if you're enjoying these, who else you want to have here on our channel. And then also, if you're part of an organization and you want a private workshop, you can contact us at Etcher Lab and we'll get back to you with more information. And remember that we give weekly prizes to our community members that tag us on Instagram or Facebook using the hashtag #EtcherStudio. We will award one winner every week, and the prize will be different each time. So sometimes you can get a mini workshop voucher, sometimes you can get a sketchbook. So we don't know what's gonna get, but go ahead and tag us. And I'm sure Lenard would also love to see what you create with today's mini workshop. So tag him.
Yes, you can tag me on Drawplet MY. So this is on YouTube. You can find me Drawplet on YouTube. It's a fairly new channel, but you can join me. And this is on Instagram and Facebook. So if you have Instagram and Facebook, I'm Drawplet MY. And if you have YouTube, it will be Drawplet. Yep. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, Lenard. I really appreciate all of the teachings of today and the philosophy. I'm really hungry. I want to go bake something right now.
All right. Yes. Thanks for having me as well. Yeah, appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Remember to sign up for the mini workshop.
Yes, please sign up for the mini workshop and make sure you subscribe to our channel. We have another live demo tomorrow, and we want to keep bringing you the best content. So fill in our survey, and sign up for our demo. We are getting amazing comments on the chat. They're all very amazed at what great detail you achieved and the great way that you are entertaining and teaching us at the same time. So thank you so much, Lenard. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We will see you again next time, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care.